The first chapters of Genesis set the stage for the whole of the Bible. It begins with the announcement that God created the heavens and the earth. This is followed by a description of God's creative process. On the first day he created light, and separated it from darkness. On the second day he separated the waters below from the waters above. And on the third day he separated land from the sea, and brought forth plant life. On the fourth day he placed celestial objects in the sky to define the seasons. On the fifth day he filled the sky with birds, and the seas with sea creatures. Then on the sixth day he created land animals and humans. All of these acts of creation are accompanied with some version of the statement, "And God saw that it was good." Then on the seventh day he rested. What we see in these verses is the world as God meant it to be, good. Humans have a unique role in the created world. They are described as having been made in the image of God. They are told to be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. God set humanity, Adam and Eve, in a garden called Eden. There they are given freedom within limits. For within the Garden of Eden stood two trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam is granted the freedom to partake of the fruit of all of the trees, but is forbidden to take from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What we see in the story of creation is God creating a good world. He is present and active in that world. One might say, this is the world as God intended it to be. It was characterized by harmony between God and humans, humans and humans, and humans in the natural world. Okay, so what went wrong? This hardly seems to be the world we live in, regardless of how much we wish it were so, or how much we work to recreate such a world. The world we live in is quite different. The third chapter of Genesis gives us some of the answer to the question of what went wrong. It doesn't tell us everything we might like to know. Storytellers don't always tell us everything we want to know. They tell us what we need to know in order to push the story along. We discover that there is a serpent in the garden. We are not told about the origins of the serpent, at least not in Genesis. But later we learn the serpent is a manifestation of the devil. The serpent used deceptive words and twisted logic to convince Eve that God's words were not to be trusted. As a result, she partook of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. She in turn convinced Adam to do so as well. Christians have traditionally referred to this as the fall. They often use the term sin to describe those actions that fail to conform to God's purposes for humanity. It also works to think of the world as having been broken. The harmony between God and humanity is broken. Further into Genesis, we see that the harmony between humans and humans is broken, as is the harmony between humanity and the created order. Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden and live in a world that bears the marks of brokenness. They no longer have access to the tree of life, and their access to God is changed as well. One of the great questions at the heart of the biblical story is the question of how to get back to where we started. How can the consequences of sin be undone? In Genesis 3:15, God set out a promise. He said to the serpent, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel." In this passage, we can identify a couple of important biblical themes. One is the conflict between humans and the devil. Another relates to the promise that one of Eve's offspring will strike at the devil. If one has looked at the Bible, you might note that it sometimes seems obsessed with genealogies. In part, that preoccupation with genealogy is related to this promise. Much of the rest of the story in the Bible traces the offspring or seed of Eve through to the birth of Jesus. Christians believe that Jesus is the one spoken of in this passage. 1 John 3:8 describes Jesus' mission as one designed to destroy the works of the devil. As we work our way through the Bible, it often looks as if this promise is going to fail. As we move through several of the subsequent chapters of Genesis, we see the consequences of living in this broken world. We see the first murder, and eventually the Bible states that the Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. At this point, God seemed intent on obliterating humanity with a flood. But one individual, Noah, found favor or grace from God. Grace is also one of the great themes of the Bible. Through grace, the promise of an offspring is preserved, the promise of blessing, and the command to be fruitful and multiply is reiterated for Noah's descendants. This initial section ends in chapter 11 with a genealogical list that traces a line through Noah and his son Seth to Abram. It is with Abram that the next episode will begin. In some ways, it might seem odd to pair up the book of Job with these early chapters of Genesis. The book of Job fits into the biblical story by giving a long and poetic meditation on the problem of human suffering. Job is described as blameless, upright, and one who feared God and turned away from evil. He is nevertheless faced with horrible tragedy, and he loses almost anything that can be lost: his children, his property, and his health. Throughout the book of Job, Job and his friends discuss and debate the problem of suffering. The book doesn't give pat answers. Despite his suffering, Job holds on to hope. At one point he confesses, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth." Thus, while Job doesn't tie itself to the main storyline, it gives us a picture of a particular human struggle with the question, why do bad things happen to good people? That question reminds us of the broken nature of the world we live in.